Welcome to this deep dive. We're jumping into a whole stack of source material you shared with us.
Yeah, and it's all focused on reading.
Exactly, reading. But specifically, how that whole experience of reading feels like it's, well, shifting. Especially now, with the internet, social media, all that stuff.
We've got quite a mix here. Articles, bits from online conversations, some really personal reflections too. And they're all kind of grappling with this question, is reading actually different now?
And if it is, why? It's a really interesting question, actually.
For sure.
So our mission really is to unpack all these different conversations, look at the viewpoints and the sources, and try to figure out what's really at the heart of this feeling, this sense that reading just isn't quite the same.
Okay, so let's start there. That core idea that just keeps coming up in the sources. Reading feels different now.
Yeah. It used to be, for a lot of people anyway, this really private thing, right? Getting lost in a story, wrestling with ideas.
Totally internal.
Right, on your own terms. But what the sources are suggesting now is there's this other aspect. Reading feels more tangled up with trends, with aesthetics.
Romanticizing it.
Yeah, romanticized portrayals, even monetization, which is a big one.
And that naturally leads to this worry, this concern that maybe reading is getting shallower.
Maybe it's more about how it looks or how you, present yourself as a reader.
Rather than just engaging with the book itself.
Exactly. Some sources even float this idea that reading, traditional reading might be dying.
Which is a pretty strong claim.
It is. And the sources give some really concrete examples of how this stuff shows up, especially online.
Right. They paint this picture of reading becoming an aesthetic. Basically, really focused on how it looks.
Yeah, the visual presentation, you see pictures of people sitting in front of these perfectly arranged bookshelves.
And the sources even mention people online asking, are those books even real? Or is it just a backdrop?
Right. It's not just having books. It's the whole performance. Posting all the time on Instagram or Bookstagram.
Showing off the pretty books?
Yeah. Positioned just right. Often, with spines that haven't even been cracked, pristine.
And then there's the content itself, always talking about the same, handful of really popular books.
Or that example one source gave, the whole idea of unhauling books you literally just hauled.
Just getting rid of books you only just got.
Specifically to make more content about it, it really blurs that line, doesn't it, between the hobby and, the performance.
Totally. And you see the pushback in the comments the sources point out. People constantly questioning if it's real.
Comments like, oh, thank you for being authentic, or all these other people are just posing.
Or even judging genres like, I don't believe you're a real reader if you only read that.
Yeah, that kind of gatekeeping.
And it even gets kind of meta, where content creators are talking about other creators and how authentic they are, debating who's really passionate versus who's just chasing click.
Okay, so that dynamic, that feels very online. But here's where it gets interesting. The sources make a strong case that the actual conversation, the worry that reading is changing for the worse, that's actually not new at all.
Right. That's a really key historical point they bring up. This tendency to look down on certain types of reading, certain genres, certain formats. They argue that's always happened.
Yeah, think about it. Attitudes towards YA or manga or comics.
Or even genre fiction like sci-fi versus serious literary fiction. That debate's ancient.
And classics versus modern books, that's always been a thing too.
And don't forget the format wars. Remember when audiobooks first got big? Or ebooks.
Oh, yeah. People were definitely saying that wasn't real reading.
Exactly. The sources found old articles doing just that, comparing genres, predicting the absolute ruin of reading for the next generation. Looking back, they say it seems almost funny. Old hat.
So there's always been this kind of tension, this judgment around what counts as proper reading.
And also, the sources point out, reading has always had this element, for some people at least, of showing off. Performing intellectual status.
Like comparing how many books you've read.
Yeah, or even pretending you've read certain things to seem smart. They say that's always been a thing, too.
Okay, so if these basic tensions aren't new, what is different now? Why does it feel...
And the sources point right at the internet.
Right. So how does the internet change things?
Amplification. That's the key word they use. These issues existed before, maybe in your book club or among friends.
Smaller scale.
Exactly. But online, what starts as a fun way to connect with other readers can, as one source put it, easily turn into a performance-based thing that sucks the joy out, just because of the sheer scale and, the constant visibility.
Okay. The amplification effect. And what does that do to readers? What's the impact?
Well, it creates a lot of pressure and comparison. The sources talk about people feeling they have to track every single book they read.
Using sites like Goodreads?
And bookshelves suddenly aren't just for storing books. They're these curated displays for everyone to see online.
And that pressure just to read more, right? Setting those Goodreads goals, feeling like you have to read faster, hit some quota.
Yeah, the comparison thing. The sources call it a plague, and it feels so intense online. It's like in other online space, fashion or beauty,
where you're comparing yourself to these polished, perfect images.
Exactly. Readers are comparing their reading habits to people with totally different lives, different amounts of free time. It's tough.
There was that specific example, too, about reading vlogs, people filming themselves reading.
Right, and the question they raised was, are you really reading when there's a camera pointed at you?
Right.
Or are you kind of thinking about how you look?
The source presenter even admitted, yeah, that happens to them sometimes. The camera pulls you out of it.
Which is really honest. But they also offered another way to think about it.
Okay.
They drew a parallel to, old paintings of people reading. The point wasn't always to capture the exact second of reading.
Ah, right. It was more about the feeling, the mood.
Yeah, or showing the life of a reader. And maybe reading vlogs are kind of like that too. Showing the broader experience, creating that connection. The performance element doesn't necessarily negate that.
So it's complicated, not just good or bad.
Definitely. And the sources really try to navigate that nuance. They admit some of the talk online about reading changing does have that snooty tone.
Like looking down your nose at people.
Yeah. But they also argue that the actual discussions happening underneath that tone, they're often valid.
Meaning?
Well, the source presenter said, personally, they don't see anything wrong with romanticizing reading or taking nice photos or filming yourself if you enjoy that. That doesn't make your reading less valuable.
Okay.
But they said, talking about the negative side effects like the pressure from Goodreads goals or feeling you have to keep up, that's important too, because people genuinely do feel that pressure.
So the real issue isn't necessarily Book Talk itself or Goodreads.
Right. Their main point seems to be it's more about, quote, the human nature of taking something that's social and turning it competitive and comparative, and how that can be so damaging.
That basic human tendency.
Yeah. It was there before. The internet just makes it huge and unavoidable.
So, given all that, what do the sources suggest? If you actually want reading to be a social thing for you, how do you deal with all this?
The main advice is basically find your space. If you want to connect with readers online, you need to find the platforms, the communities, maybe even the specific creators that, match your vibe.
Don't feel like you have to fit into every single reading space online.
Exactly. Maybe Book Talk's short videos aren't your thing. Maybe you prefer BookTube's longer discussions or Bookstagram's visuals. It's okay. Find what works for you.
Recognize that different places offer different things.
Precisely. And look, no online community is perfect. Talking about the flaws, the pressures, that's valuable. But the sources really emphasize doing it without, tearing other people down or adopting that judgmental, snooty attitude.
So you can say, this community isn't for me, without saying, this community is bad and everyone in it is fake.
Exactly that. It's about your preference, not universal condemnation.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've looked through these sources, and it seems like reading online today, Book Talk, Goodreads, all that, it adds these new social layers, new pressures.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But those underlying tension, judging how or what people read, comparing numbers, arguing about what counts, that stuff's actually pretty old.
The internet just turns up the volume massively.
Yeah. According to this material, its main role is amplification. It takes those human tendencies, comparison, competition, and makes them way more intense, way more visible.
And while there are valid criticisms about how that pressure feels,
the sources seem to land on the idea that sharing your reading, romanticizing it, connecting over it online, that's not inherently bad. The problem is more fundamental.
It's rooted in how we as humans sometimes turn social things into contests.
Exactly. Which leads to a final thought, something from the sources for you, the listener, to maybe chew on.
Okay.
If this human tendency to make social stuff competitive and comparative is so strong online, think about how that plays out beyond just reading. Think about any hobby, any interest you share or explore in a community.
Is the real challenge that the hobby itself is changing? Or is it more about how we navigate connection and validation and comparison when everything is so amplified online?
Something to think about.